Hello and welcome to the Local Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Johnson. The Local Leaders Podcast provides a platform for successful business owners to share their stories, their experiences, their advice, and their ideas in order to help our listeners achieve more success in their business and in their lives. Get ready, another great show is coming up. Hey everybody, this is Jeff Johnson with Local Leaders Podcast. I want to welcome you here today. We're happy to have you at our show, and we are thrilled to have a fellow North Carolinian here with us today from the founder of Brigs Restaurant, Mr. David Brigham. Thank you, David, for being here today.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm co-founder because my wife, Susan, was just as important a part.
Well, I should have not failed to mention that myself. So, Susan, if you're listening or when you listen, I apologize. We should have definitely had you there.
I don't think we've discussed that before. So nothing wrong with you. But yeah, she, heart and soul and blood and sweat, was right there beside me every minute.
Well, you know what? It often, and a lot of our listeners do have partners who are involved in their business, and even those that are not, they end up being involved in the business because that operator, the other spouse, is so enthralled and engaged in the business. It's like having a third partner to a marriage, right?
Exactly.
Well, we are thrilled to have you here today, David. Thank you for agreeing to join us. And I'm going to just ask you to start with, if you wouldn't mind, just taking a moment to share a little of your story, the story about Brigs Restaurant, and tell us a little bit about it and kind of how you got it started and how you and Susan got it started.
In college, she was working in a restaurant on weekend nights and Saturdays and Sundays, and I was in a different occupation. And so I picked up the part-time job working with her in that restaurant just so I could spend time with her. And when she graduated with a degree in business and economics, and that's what I majored in, we thought, what do we want to do? And we thought, we enjoy the hospitality industry. Let's open a restaurant. And we tried trying to come up with the funding to open it. Oh my gosh. But so there's where we started, and we opened up the first Brigs restaurant 32 and a half years ago.
Wow. Congratulations.
With the exception of COVID and the .com, had an increase in sales every single year that we've been open. We've won over 250 awards for best breakfast and best brunch. We work very hard at it. There have been a lot of nights where we stare at the ceiling worrying about problems, obviously.
Yes,
but
sir.
It's been a good ride. Well,
that is a tremendously long track record for restaurants. With all of us that are here today, are well aware of the numbers in terms of success of businesses in general, especially startups, but specifically with restaurants. We see so many come and go over the years. Some get past that first year, but many don't get past 5 if they do make it.
Many don't get past 1. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And fortunately, for any of our listeners today who might be an aspiring restaurateur or just getting their first project underway, we hope the content and the information and advice and counsel that you find on our show will help you along the way so that you can avoid mistakes and maybe lessen that learning curve and do better faster and find that success. But again, congratulations on 32 years. That's amazing.
Well, the biggest thing is to learn from those mistakes. Excuse me. Yeah. There we go. Is to learn from those mistakes.
Yes, sir. That's the thing. We have to drop the ego sometime and just realize that yes, we too can can err, and when you do that, you just got to realize it. And you got to make a change and do something different and move forward.
You're right. There were things I didn't put on my menu because I didn't enjoy them. And then I realized, what does it matter what I enjoy? What will my customers enjoy? Let's put those on and be successful.
Yeah, and speaking of which, as I was looking through the website again earlier today, I happened to come across the July specials, and I saw Eggs Benedict. I believe you might just be known for a little bit of your Eggs Benedict meals.
We've only had 40 different Benedicts in the last 3 years. Only 40.
Only 40. 32 years, but 40 Benedicts. Huh?
No, we've had over 100 Benedicts in 32 years. The last 3, we've had over 40.
Wow, that's amazing.
Some favorites.
Well, if you hadn't had an opportunity to get to Brigs Restaurant and enjoy that Eggs Benedict and all the other products, I hope if you're in the North Carolina area, you will find your way to one of their 5 locations soon. Well, David, again, thank you so much for being here and sharing that backstory. What we're hoping to do today is to provide some insight into maybe how. Well, let me back up. When you started so many years ago, when you and Susan started, were there, you mentioned financial, that you had to come up with the money to get the business started. How hard was that, and kind of how did you go about scraping enough together to get this thing rolling?
We didn't open the year that we hoped to because we couldn't find the money. Mm-hmm. And about a year later, we were fortunate enough that we were talking with a gentleman about leasing equipment from him, restaurant equipment, and we met with him for 45 minutes. He said, "I don't handle this. One of my salespeople do, but let's talk." And we told him what we were going to do and how we wanted to do it. And he called me the next day and said, "You're right. You don't have the credit. You don't have the money, but I believe in you. I am going to co-sign for everything on your restaurant."
Oh, wow.
And it only met him for 45 minutes.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, holy smokes is right. I saw him in an airport in Chicago 20 years later and thanked him for the 50th time. Hey, you are why Brigs Restaurants exist. But and we paid off everything early to make sure we protected that credit. But we paid. We also had a couple of investors. We paid 56% interest on the money. First interest on the first restaurant.
Goodness.
36 on the second, and 19 on the third.
Wow, that is that's something I've never heard of numbers that big.
Yeah, those are ugly. Can you imagine writing somebody a check and the next day owing them, wow, this much more? Yes. They haven't even gotten the check in the mail yet, and you owe them this. Ouch. Yeah.
You usually think about depreciation on a vehicle, when you buy a new one and drive it off the lot. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
So once you guys got funded, you really had to make it work because at that point you had a lot at risk.
We worked literally 110 hours a week. Mm-hmm. We would send home the wait staff as soon as there was only a table or two, and my wife would finish up with those and save the tips for the server. I would send home the kitchen staff, and I would start cleaning up. If she finished the dining room before me, she would come into the kitchen and grab a mop and a mop bucket and start mopping the kitchen. And I remember 6 or 7 months after we had been open, walking into an apartment and saying, "We're in the wrong apartment. This is somebody else's." She said, "No, this is ours." I said, "Are you sure?" "I don't think it's ours." It was because we walked in, I showered, I went to bed, I got up and I left. We bought new furniture for the apartment, and I didn't remember it.
Oh my gosh. Now that's amazing, but it's not probably surprising. And, for those out there who've done it before, I'm sure they understand exactly where you're coming from.
I'm sure there are many, many, many people who have done the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's a tough business to get in, but from what I've been hearing from many other restaurateurs like yourself or who've been successful have been that we don't get into it for the money. We get into it because we have a love for the hospitality, or we have a love for the food portion of it. It's never about the money to begin with. At least that's what people are telling us, and your story sounds similar. So yeah, that's a tough one. So tell us, 32 years later, I believe there are 5 Brigs restaurants today. How did you get there? How did you decide, or when did you decide to open that second location, maybe that third location? What were your thought processes, and what challenges maybe came about during those expansion periods?
The shopping center we were in with our first one in North Raleigh, that was that company's first shopping center. And they were opening a second one in Durham near RTP, and invited us out there. We opened up there. Susan and I hired a couple to run it. The wife ran the front, the husband ran the back. After a year or two, they wanted to own their own restaurant, and we didn't want to lose them. And if they opened it, if they ran it as a Brigs, we still wanted to make sure they used the best bacon, the best spices, the best this. It wasn't Tuesday night spaghetti night. They weren't putting out coupons, whatever. We gave them 1/3 of our restaurant, gave it to them, and then they wanted to own it all. He said, every time I take home things from the restaurant, I feel I owe you for the other 2/3. So we sold it to them for $2. We created Brigs Enterprises and made the first Brigs restaurant, the one that we still owned, a franchisee, and made that one a franchisee. So it would have to use the best ingredients.
Wow.
Then we hired a lady as a part-time host, and American Airlines closed down their hub at RDU, and her husband was looking for something, and she said, we want to open a Brigs. And so we opened one with them and sold it to them for $10. We're getting royalties, but still $10. Right. And so the one in Wake Forest, the man who owns it started with us as a busboy when he was 16. And then when he wanted to own his own, fine, let's help you do it. So 4 of the 5 are owned by people who started at the bottom, worked their way up, and every manager, assistant manager, same deal.
That's an amazing story, and kind of how you guys structured it, financially, number one, but secondly, so many different restaurateurs struggle with that expansion. How do you keep your consistency, across your different locations, and your commitment, to what you and Susan started. You want everything to run and be Brigs restaurant, and how do you do that? Well, you bring in people, you work with them probably for years, and then you help make them owners themselves. It's a great story. It's very inspiring. It shows how anyone can have a great opportunity. Can go from busboy or bus girl to restaurant owner, just by being in the right place at the right time and having an opportunity to work for someone like you and Susan.
It's challenging. We closed down a location in Garner because of poor service, and then I caught them adding MSG to our recipes, and I said, my name is off of your door, and I'm taking your menus now. In 30 days, we're done.
Wow. Well, you gotta control it, right? You can't have somebody going rogue on you and changing your recipes.
Can't have somebody, the other 4 locations, you can't have one person saying, I'm going to ruin everybody's reputation.
Right. Right. And speaking of reputation, from everything that I see, you guys have a stellar reputation and have been able to maintain that over the years by being, making sure that everyone's following the same playbook, right?
Well, I don't have a stellar reputation with my golf handicap, so you haven't. just saying.
Oh goodness. Well, look, a lot of folks have interest in, and have asked us questions about the pandemic and how it impacted your business. Prior to the pandemic, were you guys set up as much? Were you set up for takeout service or off-premises service?
Yes, we did do takeout.
Okay.
We obviously, none of us were prepared for the pandemic,
Right.
or I would have told my wife, buy an extra case of toilet tissue.
3 or 4 extra cases, right?
Exactly. It did change things in that we had to learn how to do curbside
Mhm.
and how to schedule for curbside and takeout with our menu. Some things do very well, some don't. You can't take a crisp waffle and put it in a foam container and it be crisp when you get home. You're either going to have to put it back in the oven, crisp it back up, or what. So that some things did better than others. So we had the challenges of warning people on that.
Yeah, I
When
get.
they closed the restaurants down and said no indoor dining, it was huge. We had to set aside much of our staff until we finally got PPP money and paid them all to sit at home.
Right.
And so that was harsh. And when some had to collect unemployment, that was harsh. But yeah, we take. My father owned his own business, and one of the most important things he taught me with that is treat your employees how you would want to be treated.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that, it's been a sobering time for the industry and, for the world as a whole with the whole pandemic thing. But it sounds like you adapted as best you can. And I like the fact that you mentioned that some things are not as friendly for a takeout curbside standpoint. And I've run across that before as well with hot items and styrofoam. And you've got to think about your packaging. You've got to, some folks redid their menus to try to only offer curbside and takeout, on a select portion of their menu that was more hospitable, to that type of environment. I'm thinking the eggs Benedict. It might have been a challenge for some of those.
Benedict wasn't that bad, but I have a friend with an Italian restaurant that almost all of his business became drive-through pickup. He had to hire more people, and now that things have opened, great. But the labor shortage, they're for the first time in 30 years closed on Mondays. They don't have enough labor, and we're struggling at our locations. It's with people sitting at home saying, I'm getting enough unemployment, I don't need to come into work.
Yes, sir.
So it's there's always a different challenge coming at you every time you turn around.
Yes, sir. That's part of being the owner and the operator of a business. But even more challenging this past, with the pandemic, because that kind of generated the whole employment situation or unemployment situation. And
I think the worst 2 phone calls I got had nothing to do with pandemic, or they had to do with we just got a phone call that they put a bomb in the restaurant and we have 30 minutes to get all of the employees and customers out.
Oh my gosh.
At one location. And the other one that we just got robbed at gunpoint
Ah,
at another location. So and that's just two of dozens.
yeah,
It's that's why I have this bald spot in the back. Okay, that's why I'm on 4 different heart medications. Okay.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Well, that has been not the two things you mentioned are some terrible examples of phone calls that calls you don't want to get.
No.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to get those kind of calls. But that does lead me to ask you about, because I've had several other owners who talked about two things. The first is labor shortage, which you just touched on. It's been a big issue, and we have seen numerous restaurants out there have to change their hours. That's basically, let's say, you've got 10 employees or per shift, and you're only, or normally you want to run at 10 per shift, and you can only get 7 consistently in there. Then you run into overtime situations where you're trying to work them to death. And you guys are a 7-day-a-week restaurant, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
4 of them are 7 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. The Raleigh one is 7 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. on Sunday and Monday, but open until 8:30 p.m. at night.
Yeah.
We have been very, very fortunate that of the thousands of employees we've had over the decades, yes, we have had the one-day wonders who didn't show up the next day or showed up for a week or whatever. But in general, we have some incredible dedicated employees that rain or shine or snow or sleet, if I can drive there, if I can get there, if I'm not sick, because health codes, if you're sick, don't come in. If I'm not sick, I will be there. We have an incredible staff of people.
Well, you've been fortunate to be able to do that, and I'm sure the experience that your customers receive, on each visit is reflective of those employees, because they're the ones that are giving that experience to your customers.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, from a staff.
I'm glad you said that, because in most interviews that go into print, it turns out I'll answer this, I'll answer that, and by the time it ends up in that magazine or newspaper, David Brigham invented the omelet. David Brigham is responsible for that great service you got, that great meal you got, that clean restaurant you were. And no, it's you're right. You are absolutely right. It is entirely a team of people that make that happen.
Yeah, well, a lot of founders and owner operators that I've talked to have talked about their role, in the business and what they see it as. And I've just been fortunate enough to hear it enough times. It finally clicked and stuck. But oftentimes I'll hear people like yourself say, it's our job is to create the culture and, provide the tools necessary for our staff to deliver the experience, the food, the whole experience, and everything else. They're the ones in the woods and then getting it done on a day-to-day basis, and we just need to make sure that they have the opportunity to be successful.
And they're the ones that give us the guidance that maybe we should do this instead, or maybe we should do that instead.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not omniscient. So great. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, well, I remembered us speaking about that earlier, and so I wanted to make sure that we gave kudos where they were due, because as you said, it doesn't always get out that way. Hey, let me ask you this: we talked about the pandemic a little bit and kind of how it impacted you guys. Do you see the industry itself, or Brigs in particular, ever getting back to what where things were, or do you see it forever changed?
I see it going to change somewhat. We already got rid of curbside.
Okay.
It just we felt it wasn't fair that if someone stood in line for an hour on a Saturday or Sunday to sit down in our restaurant, for somebody else to call in and 15 minutes later drive up and pick up their food.
Yeah.
Wasn't fair. So curbside is gone, and we tell takeout orders, here's where you are in line. Let's be fair to the people who are actually standing in 90-degree heat or in 30-degree cold or whatever. So I do see curbside remaining for a number of different restaurant types and disappearing for a number of restaurant types. I do see us returning to what we were as soon as this Delta or whatever variation goes away.
Yeah, yeah, and I think what I've been seeing and hearing is, it depends on your business. I was speaking with a fine dining establishment earlier, actually today, and they closed down while they could not have in-store dining or in-house dining. They elected not to provide curbside or takeout because the fine dining was an experience, and it was just not transmittable. They couldn't produce the quality that they wanted to be able to produce and provide the experience of what they did in a takeout form. So they just shut it down.
Exactly right. A fantastic restaurant opened up on downtown Raleigh. They were going to open 5 different types of restaurants. He's a great chef out of California, and the pandemic hit a month after he opened the first, and it just didn't fit with takeout.
Yeah.
Some things, and you and I both can think of a dozen restaurants instantly that know the dining experience and the food is at the restaurant, and it closed down, and the other 4, who knows if they'll ever open.
Yeah, do you see you guys with any future expansion anytime in the near term, or maybe any kind of new brands or concepts?
Okay, you're looking at an old guy here. Okay, and my wife has been saying, when are you going to retire? And I keep telling her, next year. Well, that year's got to happen sooner or later. I expect to have a much younger guy that I'm already training to take over Brigs Enterprises. I have turned down several franchisee requests because I'm old. I don't need that work. I'm just sorry. I'm good. I'm good. And I'm hoping that he will make it 20, 30, 40, whatever units out there. And I hate calling them units because that's franchise.
That is franchise talk.
Right now, all of us are friends. We all live in the triangle. We eat together at dinners and whatnot. Eventually, as it goes larger, that won't be the case. But yeah, I'm hoping that he carries it forward and does well.
I'm sure that with everything you guys have accomplished over all these years, that he will go forward and do wonderful things.
If not, I know where he lives.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, let me ask you this, because I've had you on for a little while now, and I think this would be helpful to some of our listeners. But we've undoubtedly got some listeners out there who are maybe considering some restaurant franchises and looking around at different options. What advice would you give to them that could help them be more prepared to take on a new franchise? How could they make themselves look better in the eyes of the franchisor?
As far as them opening the restaurant or becoming a franchisee?
Becoming a franchisee, how could they be more prepared to be a good franchisee? And I know I didn't prep you on this one, so
but that's off the cuff. That's okay, because I had a good friend who asked me to take a look at his franchise agreement, and I called him 2 hours later and said, I've only found 60 problems in this franchise agreement, 15 or 20 of which are deal cutters.
Yes.
So you need to make sure that your franchisor is looking out for you. You need to, that the marketing will be good for you, that the percentages they are charging you in royalties and in marketing co-op are fair, that if there are discounts available from distributors for buying, I mean, if a chain is buying this many tons, like for us, we buy 29 tons of bacon a year. Each of our restaurants gets the rebates and the discounts, not the franchisor. You need to make sure that you're going to get the benefits of group buying. Just in the number one, go around and ask a few of the other franchisees, how's it going? If you had to do it over again, what would you do differently?
Mm-hmm. That's a great piece of advice right there. And we could probably have a whole podcast on franchise agreements and how to read them and how to make sure that you are absolutely getting, having your interests covered.
They also need to be careful when because they got to open somewhere.
Yeah.
And when we had a location open up in Charlotte, there were so many things wrong in the lease. They were going to charge us 2% of everything we gave free to our employees to eat. Oh. And we had to put things in the front window. It's like, no, we're not a dress shop. We're not going to put any omelets or something in the front when so they need to look carefully at the lease. And one of the things we insisted, it was a 10-year-old shopping center. Anything that happens to this air conditioning in the first 3 years, we'll do the servicing, you do the repairs. 2 weeks after we opened, it died, and it was $12,000 to replace that air conditioning. So they need to take very close looks at the lease that they're signing, if they are indeed leasing a building.
That in itself would be well worth having taken time to listen, just to pick up one little nugget there in terms of making sure that you got your ducks in a row, so to speak, and that goes for owner operators as well, not just franchisees. But when you're starting a new project or a new restaurant, that lease negotiation is going to be a critical piece.
It's huge, huge. And another thing is, what if something happens, a sleet storm, a tornado, or whatever? Are you prepared to keep paying all other expenses and not get a paycheck for a few months? If you need a paycheck every month, I had an acquaintance that ate with us frequently that opened up an Italian restaurant and said, I am paying my wife this much for the front, and I'm paying me this much for the front to run the back, and then the other expenses. They closed in less than a year. Your paycheck cannot be number one and number two. It's got to be the bottom of the list. And if you're not sure that you can live without a paycheck for months in case there's a hurricane, in case there's a fire, in case there's whatever, rethink.
Very good advice. I was talking with someone earlier in the week, and they were talking about, they thought one of the biggest, if not the biggest challenge with opening a new venture was undercapitalization. And that's exactly what you're referring to. Someone comes in, and probably needs $200,000 in the bank and maybe has 20, but they want to open up. Yep. And those are the types of situations that you do not want to be in. And
that's the number one reason. I don't know about other businesses, probably so, but for restaurants, that's the number one reason for closing. I had just enough pennies to get it open. And then, bam.
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right. And with the 80%, I think that's the last number I heard. About 80% of first year restaurants don't make it. And that's a big reason. You've got to be funded enough to not take that paycheck until the business is actually producing profit.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, are there any?
Trust me, 56% interest, huge.
Yeah, your paycheck went to the bank or your creditor. That's
It
where
was no paycheck.
Yeah, it probably took you a few years to get over that thing. That's tough. Well, I've had you here for a little while, so I'm just going to ask if there's anything, any general advice, any other things you might want to add that we hadn't talked about today that might be good advice for businesses either just getting started or maybe struggling to move up to the next level. Does anything pop into your brain that you might want to share?
If it's your passion, hang in there. Treat your employees the way you would want to be treated. You have to think with your brain more than your heart. It's always easy to say, I really want to do this, but the reason businesses close because they weren't thinking with their brain. So you gotta think with both. And if it's your heart, think, how can I adapt this or change this or do whatever's not making this what it should be? And seek advice. None of us know everything. If reach out and say, okay, how are they doing it right or whatever.
Yeah.
And life is not a dress rehearsal. So enjoy it now.
Well, I think that's very well put, and might even be some quotes in there we can throw on the screen later. Quotes from David.
I want some royalties on those. I'm just saying.
And no 56% interest rates either.
None.
Right? None of those whatsoever. Well, it's David, it's been a pleasure.
It has.
Talking to you and learning more about the story behind Brigs Restaurant. And even though you might be looking to retire here sometime in the upcoming years, I'm sure Susan will be glad to finally drag you back home, or maybe she won't. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either.
Yeah,
she may tell me in month 2, don't you need to go back to work?
Yeah, I think you need a part-time job. I think we all have that worry when the time comes. But anyway, it's a pleasure speaking with you, and we appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your advice and your experience, which is really what we're after here, is just to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, to find out what you've done, how you've done it, and some guidance as to how to move on and move through all the challenges and obstacles that people encounter in trying to get a new business going.
Well, I've done it through advice from people far wiser than me that had also been in different businesses. Listen, learn, throw away what you don't think is great, but don't discard everything. There's wisdom in a lot of what people who have been there and done that can share with you.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And that's what we're hoping to impart today from talking with you and sharing with our audience. And again, it was awesome having you on. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna wrap this thing up, and we'll see if we can tie a bow around it and get it out to the audience. But again, my name's Jeff Johnson. I'm the host of Local Leaders Podcast, and we've had David on with us here now, and his lovely wife Susan, who is not here, but a critical part of the business of Brigs Restaurant out of Raleigh, North Carolina. And we appreciate everything you've done and shared with us. And we look forward to talking to you again soon. So to all our audience, thank you very much. And tune back in every Monday or Wednesday to see the new releases on our YouTube channel and our Local Leaders Podcast website. Thank you again, David. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.